seems to steady him. Look at that. Steadies it. Hello, Brobs. We're back with the After Midnight Ghost Book, a collection of supposed ghost stories that seem to be from Great Britain, England, as it were, some years back, but no longer seems to be Great Britain or England. Kathrine Talbot among the British soldiers. She agreed to marry him at the point of the road where the bay opened out on their left. Jake stopped the car and took her into his arms. She thought how simple it was to give so much pleasure, then retracted the thought. She had just promised to make him happy for the rest of his life. Eve, darling, he said, letting her go, looking at her as if after asking her so often he couldn't believe she said yes. Then his expression changed. He grinned widely. Of course he'd been sure. He'd known she'd capitulate. Eve was not displeased. Perhaps he was right, and it had been a foregone conclusion. Anything was better than the vacillation that had beset her ever since they had become lovers in the spring. He had wanted to marry her from the first, and she had wanted marriage, wanted to settle down, yet could not bring herself to say this final yes. She had used the fashionable excuses, her career, her freedom, the irrelevance nowadays of marriage. Had he believed her? She had known well enough that her reluctance had another cause, that she was still expecting a different kind of love, that she felt she had been promised some greater emotion, some overwhelming happiness. That wasn't Jake's fault, she had told herself. He was a perfect lover, considerate, gentle, handsome. She found his foreignness attractive, an American straight out of a film. He was wealthy, would spoil her, and he had told her from the start that she wouldn't have to give up her life in England. They would have two homes. His business took him to London as much as to New York. Now, as he started the car once more, she promised herself that she wouldn't ever again allow herself to listen to that subversive inner voice, nor look round every street corner for that promised husband whose face she could not imagine. Darling Jake, she said, and put her hand over his on the steering wheel. Has the island persuaded you? He asked. Yes. No, she said, and didn't know. She had certainly not anticipated her capitulation, not planned it on the jumbo from England, or the smaller plane from Boston, or on the ferry afloat between mainland and misty islands, sea and blue sky. He let it go at that. He had hoped that this place, which he considered perfect, would work its magic on her. That it should have done so quickly just proved how right he had been. When he had caught sight of her across the auction room, he had recognized her as the ideal wife he had been looking for. He had been in London for a series of big art sales, and that first day had felt as if the treasure he had come to bid for had been unveiled for him. He had pursued her subtly but firmly. He was not surprised that he had succeeded. Great aunt will be pleased, he said. He was the senior of his own generation in that big family. One day he would be its head. Eve had soon learned that his family was of great importance to him. He spoke of them often, and when Eve had asked questions, he had overwhelmed her with answers. When Jake began on genealogy, she was lost. At home, there had been mother and father and a sister, grandparents in the north of England, an auntie or two, all long shed. Jake had shed nothing. His grandparents and great-grandparents, all long dead, were real people in his real world. His uncles and aunts, his cousins and their husbands and wives, their children, all were part of a private universe, a family network throughout the United States. They lived, she had learned, all over. But every summer they came to the island, their earthly paradise. That her own children would one day be part of this tribe was attractive. She had never felt that she belonged to anything much. They turned off the road, up a curved drive. The house stood long as an ocean liner on the flat land, facing the wide view of the sea. Here Jake had spent all his childhood summers, and it seemed right that the porch should be full of children now. They came running, and to surround the car, opened the doors, took Jake's hands, and pulled him out. And when Eve stood beside the little girl, put her arms around her knees, and looked up to her. Jake laughed, bounced one of the small boys up in his arms, threw a ball for another, introduced Eve. "Did you come on Concord?" one of the boys asked. "My dad bought a Jaguar in, it should be say Jaguar, in London last year," another said, and one of the girls came over and touched her necklace, leaning on her in easy intimacy. They all looked at her with interest and curiosity, vocals and uninhibited in the American manner. Vocal, not vocals. Friendly. "Scat," Jake finally said. "We'll see you at the beach. We're going to see great Aunt Susan." "I want to come," one of the children whined, hanging onto Jake's arms. "I was born in this house, Uncle Jake," a little girl said, as if this gave her a right. And me," the others shouted. "Nonsense," Jake said, and laughed at them. "Scram now," and they scattered, making for the road and the beach, others vanishing through a stand of pines beyond the house. "Do they all live here?" "They're here for the summer," Jake said, "and they don't stay in this house." Indeed, it was very quiet when they got indoors, cool after the heat outside. An old lady got up from the sofa and came towards them, walking with a stick. She was small, and Jake stooped to kiss her. Eve took her hand, then, as if compelled, bent to kiss her too. The old lady smiled up at her. "Welcome to the island," she said, and might have meant welcome to the family. Later, Eve and Jake crossed the road they had come on and followed a track through grass and low-growing blueberry bushes towards the sea. The sun filtered through a white veil of mist and wrapped Eve in delicious warmth. "What do you got, bruv?" She could see the thin mist lying just above the water, which was very calm. Far away on the other side of the island, a foghorn boomed, but here on the side facing the distant mainland shore, there was no fog, just this mysterious vapor which made the faraway hills look like the faint outlier lines, later to be rubbed out of a pencil sketch for a watercolor. Eve stretched out her arms to catch all the sun and heat she could absorb and made a little sound of contentment. Then she bent to the blueberry bushes and looked at them closely. "We have plants like that in England," she said, "on sandy soil, but I've never seen berries on them." Jake stooped and picked her a handful. They were very small, but grew close together on the stem, so that he quickly stripped them from the plant. The little miniature bushes were greener than the surrounding grass, which looked poor and parched. On the rocks, gray and rough between the tussocks, lichen grew. "Look," Jake said, and stooping, showed her a patch of lichen, gray as the stone, but with little individual red tips on each tiny plant. "We call them British soldiers." Eve laughed, strutted ahead of him, straight-backed and high-stepping, imagining the redcoats as she had seen them in films. "Fighting in this country, Indians or French or the early Americans. Did they come as far as this? From Nova Scotia," he instructed. "There was a battle in this bay. Now I've come to invade you." She felt suddenly completely happy. Now the path began to slope down, and they could see the crescent beach with spruce, pine, and silver birch growing on the 2 points which reached into the sea. Each side of the path was waist high in purple willow herb, which Jake called fireweed, wild raspberry bushes bearing fruit, juniper, and wild roses. She reached for, but did not pick, a cluster of the flat, perfect pink roses. She could see a beach house on her left, a picnic table among the trees, and groups of grown ups and children on the beach, a solitary figure in the water. Will it be cold? She asked Jake. It'll be okay today, he said. We've had hot, settled weather and no high winds. Early in the summer, it's like ice. As they stepped on the pebbly beach, she looked at Jake's family, felt suddenly shy, and wished she'd stayed in the cool house, so private with the old lady. She had not even been given time to look around before being taken to the beach. It's no good trying to swim unless the water is right up, Jake had said, and Great Aunt Susan had nodded and supplied the time for high tide. Couldn't she see the house first? Eve had asked. Plenty of time for that later. Jake had taken her to her room to rummage for her bathing suit and change. Everything else would have to wait. She had just had time to look around the living room, which had a fireplace and many books, large paintings of sailing ships, which looked nice in the dim corners, but rather crude when viewed from nearer. Great Aunt Susan had explained that these had been painted by her grandfather. Eve, professionally interested, tried to fix a date to them, glancing speculatively at Great Aunt Susan, to find the old lady smiling at her, quite capable of reading her thoughts. There was a row of boats lined up on a shelf, a galleon carved in other people's lifetime, a beautiful model of a man of war, and at the end the plastic model some grandchild had made from a kit. You can look at everything later, Jake told her, impatient for a swim or perhaps for a chance to show her off to the assembled family on the beach, now that she had said she would marry him. It seemed only too likely. She looked askance at all the people and wished she had turned back into the room where the old lady had already been engaged in a book. Jake made the introductions. If he did not quite say, "This is my Eve," he implied it. Eve remembered just such a look on his face when he had claimed, after the first auction, the paintings he had bought. The men got up politely. The girls smiled and waved from prone positions. Some sat with babies on their laps or kept an anxious eye on naked toddlers. Eve smiled and nodded, but the names floated past her memory. This is my Aunt Libba and her sons Jean and Chester, and you've met two of their children. There was Uncle Dan, swarthy and obviously an uncle by marriage. Among all those fair-haired relations, cousins called Jody and Susan, Tom and his wife and children. I shan't be able to remember, Eve said, but I'll try. Never mind, Uncle Dan said. We'll help you, Eve, as if to demonstrate how easy it was for them to remember her name. Eve looked towards the beach hut, but it seemed boarded up, and by the careless heaps of towels and clothes, she guessed that one just stripped off there on the beach. She pulled her dress over her head and stood in her bikini, ready to go into the water. But Tom and his family, who had only just arrived, had captured Jake for an immediate gossip. Jake squatted on his haunches to talk to Tom's wife. I'll have a quick swim on my own, Eve said, turning from them. I'll be right with you, Jake called. I'll catch up with you. Fine, Eve said, glancing back at the group. Girls in bikinis exposing their bronze bodies to the misty sun, the boys in brightly colored trunks, fair curly hair to their shoulders, the noisy children playing among the pebbles, a group of older ones with a basketball. What the hell's a basketball bat? With a basketball bat and softball. A teenage girl, long hair trailing, walking alone, searching the pebbles for beach glass or sand dollars, and Jake, already getting up, about to follow her. The water was icy cold, with the mist floating above it. She had expected it to be gently steaming, like bathwater in a cool bathroom. She went in slowly, shivers running up her spine, savoring the contrast of the heat and intense cold, submerging herself until her chin touched the water. Then she struck out strongly, a good swimmer from school days and holidays at the seaside. This was what she wanted, a moment alone out here. She swam slowly, breaststroke, enjoying the cold water, the dazzle, sailing boats far out like ghost ships in the mist, their sails shimmering. Then, perhaps because of the tiring journey or some chemistry of heat and cold sea, she felt cramp in her legs. It paralyzed her so instantly her heart seemed to have stopped beating. She needed firm ground to stamp on, to unknot the muscles in her calves and thighs, something other than water to tread. She turned towards the beach where they all moved about or sat, shouted frantically without a sound, and as she went under, thought that even if Jake were already in the water not far behind her, in this dazzle and haze, he wouldn't see her. Down and down she went into blackness until unconsciousness took the pain away. Then the pain left her quite suddenly. She rose sharply towards the surface and came up spluttering and splashing, took deep breaths into her aching lungs, and floated for a moment, wheezing and heaving, before she struck out for the shore. The family was dispersed about the beach, swimming rather jerkily, her legs still sore from the cramp. Emma looked for Alden, found him playing ball with the two little boys, her brother Tad joining in now and again from a sitting position. On the balustrade of the beach hut, Susan's pink bathing dress was drying. It looked very bright in the sun and had shocked the aunts with its low back and its print of huge black roses, and the fact that Arnold had bought it for his bride to be. In their day, such intimate presents had been left until after marriage. The wedding was fixed for late September, and Emma told herself that it was just as well she hadn't drowned just then. She had brought up her brother and sister since their parents' early death, and the arrangements from the guest list to the bride's bouquet were in her hands. She had often dreaded that day and imagined in advance the heartbreak of their parting. Now it seemed suddenly ordinary, bearable. She too would marry, and as married sisters, they would extend their love into a delightful new relationship. Nobody knew as yet that she loved Alden, that he had proposed. She would keep that secret, she thought, until after Susan's wedding. Allow that girl her deserved glory. After that, she and Alden would marry quietly and settle down to their happy family life. They would have children, cousins to Susan's, and would all come here summer after summer, grow old, please God, as her grandmother had, who, until a few years ago, had been pushed down to the beach in a bath chair by her maid. Happiness, she thought, her face transformed by her smile. Walking across the beach from the hut, Susan noticed the change, astonished to find her sister suddenly pretty. She had been prepared to feel both pity and reproach to be leaving Emma, who had done so much for her and who, until recently, had been so close to her. She had thought it difficult to tell where Susan stopped and Emma began. But this had changed since her engagement. She had ceased to confide, had allowed the distance between them to grow so that the final gulf, her marriage, might not be more painful by being sudden. Now she hoped that Emma's unexpected happiness might add to her own good fortune, and that they might even find a different intimacy in their adjacent marriages. She would like Alden as a brother in law. She thought of him as a very solid and deliberate person, a little reticent as she imagined the British, among whom he had fought in the recent war. She suspected him, secretly, of a little too much idealism. How else could one explain that he had gone to England to volunteer for that war long before the United States had thought it their business to involve themselves in it. Hi, Alden, she said as she passed him, stooping once more to throw the ball. He grinned at her, his future sister in law, fully aware of her feeling of astonished relief, then saw Emma coming across the beach. Went to join her. She took off her bathing cap, shook out her short hair, smiled. For the first time, she recognized the wish to touch him. She blushed. Good swim? She nodded, would not admit to the cramp which had frightened her. It would take some years of marriage before she would get used to confessing her own weaknesses and worries. I don't know how you youngsters can go into that water, Aunt Clarissa said from her deck chair. Before the war, I reckon there wasn't a man, woman, or child in the whole of Maine who'd venture into the ocean. Do you think we've grown tougher since the war, Mrs. Ellis? Alden asked. Just a whole lot more foolhardy, Aunt Clarissa said. The world's changed. She gave a deep sigh. Emma thought that it was the prohibition her aunt most deplored. She'd complained at lunch about the bootleg liquor, nasty stuff, that Alden had brought her. The senior aunt, a decent bottle, had endeared him to her from the first. The world's changed, all right, Uncle Ned said. He'd been intransigent in his opposition to the state's involvement in a conflict he considered none of their business, and showed a deep antipathy to those who had fought and returned and had, he thought, been made too much of, especially by the women. Never should have interfered in that war, he grumbled. Wouldn't have found me going over there fighting with the British Army. They're our natural enemies. Rubbish, Ned, Clarissa said. Couldn't have let the Kaiser get away with it. I think it was very brave to go and fight, Emma said, and felt as if she had announced her love or engagement to the assembled family. I guess I'd better go and change, she said, and made her way to the bathing hut. Later, she walked with Alden up the path, out of the sight of the others. He picked a pink rose and stuck it in the top buttonhole of her dress. Will you marry me soon, Emma? He asked, taking her hand. I love you, she said, and the blush which enveloped her seemed to be part of this hot afternoon, so that the feeling of blood in her cheeks and heat in her arms wouldn't go away. She turned back towards the glittering sea where Aunt Clarissa could just be seen topping the rise from the beach, Uncle Ned in her wake. Far away, two sailing boats stood still and shimmering as if the accumulation of light amid the mist had conjured a hallucination of white sails. She disengaged herself and bent down out of reach of his kiss and touched the cool blueberry bushes. I've never seen so many berries, Alden said. We'll come back here every summer, he told her firmly. We'll build ourselves a house. He looked about him as if already considering its location. It'll be great for the kids. She looked down and saw the gray lichen with its red tips and thought of the name they gave it and how she would tell him some day in that happy future stretching as widely as the immense view, and she smiled secretly to think of him over there where he had fought. The house felt wonderfully cool when they walked in. The smell of kerosene from the lamps hung faintly in the air. A tray of lemonade stood on the table before the empty fireplace, newly poured and with chunky ice in each glass. Did you swim, Emma? Her grandmother asked from the sofa, and Emma bent and kissed the old lady. It was very cold, Grandma, she said, and shivered suddenly, remembering the fright she had had. The old lady put up her hand and ruffled the fair hair. Convenient to have your hair so short, she said to Emma, and to the young man, in my day nobody went into the ocean around here. Grandma could sit on her hair when she was young, Emma told Alden. Help yourself to lemonade. Then she went towards the kitchen to hang up her bathing dress and towel in the back garden. She smiled back at Alden, and the smile stayed on her face as if to salute all the familiar things around her. The bookcases as she passed them, the shelf with the old galleon and the man of war, and the two sailing boats the little boys had made of last night's walnut shells while visiting cards for sales. Smiled at the schooner grandfather had painted just before he died, and at the cook as she passed through the kitchen. Did you go into that cold sea, Miss Emma? The big black cook said. Don't you go catching your death. Emma went out of the back door, where a line was strung between two stunted apple trees which never bore fruit. She touched the stout cord as if it were some lifeline that held her to her world. Don't let it ever go away, she thought in sudden panic, twin to what she had felt out there in the water. Don't let me ever not come back. Holding on hard, tears in her eyes. Did you get cramp? Eve was holding on hard to some object, which she imagined a lifeline, but found to be Jake's finger. Let me tow you. But she let go of his hand and swam strongly towards the shore. Nobody seemed to have moved, yet the bikinied girls and the naked children appeared strange to her. She shook her head as if to get water out of her ears. Were you in trouble? Jake looked concerned enough. She got to her feet on the rough pebbles and staggered a little on her way up the beach. I'm only a little tired, she said in a strange, stiff voice, and the others noticed that she looked pale. She sat down on a large stone and hid her face in her striped towel. She knew well enough who these people were, she thought suddenly, that she could even remember their unmemorable names. But it was the others she wanted. She wished and wished that she could lift her face from the towel and see the little boys play ball with Tad and Alden. But it was Jake who sat down beside her. Jake, her lover, her future husband. She shivered. You're cold, Tom said. You stayed in too long. I'm not used, she said. The water was so calm, and the gentle mist still made it look as if it were just off the boil. From the other side of the island, the foghorn sounded, very far away and muffled. Perhaps it's the heat, Jake said. Shall we go back? That would be nice. Eve got up and looked about her, thought of the cool house up there. Give the girl a strong drink when you get back, Uncle Dan advised, smiling. She looks peaky. Eve thought of the bootleg whiskey Alden had brought, and in her memory she would reproduce its fiery taste. She looked at Jake with great surprise, and he was astonished at the coldness of her glance. Walking into the house, she thought again that Alden would be there, that the old lady on the sofa would be Grandma, not Great Aunt Susan, that her Susan would walk through a door, the bride to be. She felt an ache of longing. When she saw the schooner in full sail on the canvas, the galleon on the shelf, she felt hope. But the plastic warships at the end of the line, the television box on the low table, dashed all happy expectations. She sniffed the air, but no oil lamps had been lit in this house for years. Great Aunt Susan sent her to lie down upstairs, where she drew thin curtains against the glare, and where the sound of the foghorn hardly reached her, and Eve, falling asleep, thought that it might be Emma who awoke. Later, all the family came to dinner. They sat at the big round table where the dishes each household had provided made a varied feast of the meal. A large flask of red wine circulated. There were candles. Faces become flushed from this double heat. They talked about the island, their island, and it might have been their ancestors who had colonized it and defended it in that long ago war against the British, kept sheep on it last century, built the lighthouse, and anchored schooners in the roads, started the lobster fishing. They talked about the bay, dark now and free of mist, luminous under the 3/4 moon. Did you swim here when you were young? Eve asked Great Aunt Susan. Why, certainly, the old lady said, though the fashion didn't start until after the First World War. Before that, nobody thought of it. Ah, the 20s, Uncle Dan said. I remember my first summers here. I don't think your aunts ever liked all that stripping and bathing, to Great Aunt Susan. No bikinis, one of the young girls said sagely. The year we were married, my husband to be brought me a pink bathing suit from Paris. Great Aunt Susan reminisced. It had a little skirt hitched up one side and big black roses printed all over it. The aunts considered it fast, she laughed. Hello, Brobs. They wouldn't have thought much of the Johnsons all swimming in the raw. Eve leaned across the table, catching Aunt Susan's eye. The year you were married, she prompted. We waited until almost Christmas, Great Aunt Susan said quietly. It wasn't a very happy summer, Uncle Dan added, as if to quench further questions. Of course, it was before my time. I didn't come into the family until your Bobby was a year old. Speaking of Jake's uncle, not Jenks. Great Aunt Susan smiled. There's no sense in not speaking of it after all this time. Arnold was here for the first time, staying with my Aunt Clarissa, who was a great one for the bootleg whiskey. But that summer my sister died, and after that, everything was said for a while. She drowned, the youngest of Jake's cousins said, eyes wide. It was a terrible tragedy. Great Aunt Susan said, sighing, now it's part of family lore, and you shouldn't forget her, though I'm the last who will remember what she was like. After our parents died, she brought up my brother Tad and I. Tad was Jake's grandfather, she explained to Eve. It was a day like today, calm. There wasn't any cause ever found for her drowning, vanishing like that before our eyes, though none of us saw her go. She was silent, as if that great puzzle was as fresh now as on the day it happened. Could she have wanted to drown? One of the young men asked. No, she was happy too, in love. She went in to swim and simply didn't come back. Nobody noticed at first. The children were playing ball. Then the young man said, Where is Emma? And we missed her. We looked for her in the bathing hut. Then we took the boat out. Her body was never found. And though all except Eve had heard the story before, there was a deep silence, as if they were stunned again, unbelieving. All the knives and forks were still. Then one of the girls picked up the flask of wine and filled everyone's glass, resting her hand for a moment on the old lady's shoulder. It's a long time ago, Great Aunt Susan said. I never thought she'd marry. Now I can't even remember the young man's name. Alden, Eve thought. I remember your name, Alden. I shan't forget. What a sad story. All the happiness Emma had missed. But she knew that she would leave the island next day, that she wouldn't see Jake again, wouldn't marry. Not him, nor any man who wasn't Alden. These are more like suspense stories and not ghost stories, but what do we got?